Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Mhm.
We love to dig deep into all sorts of stuff, and this time we're going to be cracking open a chapter from Church Boy Chronicles.
Oh, yeah, this one's great.
It really is. This chapter is called Train Up a Child, and we're going to be exploring Reginald Delmain Thompson's insights on, well, on raising kids, right?
Right.
And how to raise those kids to become responsible adults who are grounded in faith.
Yeah, with a big focus on
Yes.
being intentional about parenting and really investing in a child's development from the very beginning.
From the very beginning.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting.
Mhm.
One of the things that really stood out to me is how Thompson draws from his own experience, like his own upbringing, and specifically the strong spiritual foundation that his parents instilled in him. He even talks about memorizing
Yeah,
scripture
I remember.
while his friends were outside playing.
Absolutely. It's so fascinating how he kind of connects that back to his own sense of discipline and responsibility later in life.
Exactly. And that kind of makes you wonder about the role of discipline, even in something like memorizing scripture, right?
Mm.
Like, is it really about instilling those specific beliefs? Or is it more about kind of fostering a sense of discipline, focus, you know?
That's a really interesting question.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
I think Thompson really seems to argue that those early experiences with faith,
Well,
you know, with all the inherent structure, the rituals, all of that kind of shaped how he approached being responsible
Hmm.
later on. It wasn't necessarily all about like what the scriptures said, but it was the act of committing to something bigger than himself.
Right. And that really connects to this big idea he has, this point about discipline being a key ingredient in raising responsible adults.
Oh, for sure.
And, I appreciate that he makes it clear that it's not about punishment.
No, not at all.
He says it's about helping children develop self-control and giving them the tools to make wise choices,
Yeah,
which I think is so important.
absolutely.
And it makes me think about, well, how does that idea of discipline as self-control fit in with more modern parenting styles that often emphasize, freedom and exploration?
Yeah, it's a really
Example.
interesting tension.
Yeah.
Right. Because on the one hand, you have this idea of guidance and structure.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, you want to let your kids discover who they are, you know? And I think Thompson advocates for a kind of a balance, but he definitely leans more towards the intentional style of parenting.
He does. And he takes that idea of intentionality even further. This really cool analogy
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
of
Okay.
raising a child to making a valuable investment.
It's so true.
It's like, it's like investing in stocks or real estate. You put in the work early
Up front. Yeah.
for that long-term return.
Yeah, he uses the example of Venus and Serena Williams. Their dad invested heavily in their tennis skills when they were little.
Yeah.
And look where they are now.
Global icons.
This just highlights the impact parents have on their kids' futures. It's huge.
It really is.
Yeah.
But of course, there are all sorts of different ideas about how to be a good parent.
Oh, tons. Yeah.
And Thompson doesn't shy away from that. He actually brings up these two contrasting styles, right?
Yes.
You've got the really hands-on intentional style and then this more permissive kind of approach.
Uh-huh. And he's pretty critical of the more hands-off approach.
He is.
He sees some negative stuff coming from that. He even talks about parents who are more concerned with how things look on the outside.
Appearances.
Yeah, rather than their kids' character and morals.
Which I think that's thought-provoking, right?
Yeah, it is.
Because it makes you wonder, is there something missing in those approaches?
Yeah,
Maybe they underestimate the value of guidance and structure.
it's definitely possible. Yeah, and it
Yeah.
makes you think about the long term, right? Like what happens down the road.
Exactly.
Thompson paints this kind of stark picture of what happens when parents aren't involved enough. He talks about adults who still can't stand on their own 2 feet. They haven't learned those skills. They're not mature. Things they should have learned way earlier.
It's a real cautionary tale. It is. But what's interesting is that he doesn't just point the finger at individual families. He actually extends this critique to the church as a whole.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he does. He criticizes what he sees as this overemphasis on condemning sin, like we're just going to tell people what they're doing wrong,
Mm-hmm.
instead of actually nurturing young people, discipling them, and teaching them practical life skills like how to actually navigate life.
Yeah, it sounds like he's almost saying the church should be like a partner to parents,
Right.
supporting them in their role instead of trying to take over.
Yeah, I see that because he really specifically mentions the need to teach young people about how to be responsible,
Yeah.
how to handle themselves appropriately. He sees that as the parent's primary job,
Mm.
you know,
Hmm.
and the church is there to kind of help out.
And he makes a really good point about parents needing to set a good example, right? There's
Absolutely.
always watching us, and parents are their biggest role models. I always think about that saying, do as I say, not as I do, which is totally what Thompson's pushing back
It
against.
is. And it all ties back to that biblical principle of honoring your father and mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how respecting your parents then translates into having respect for authority and for other people in general.
For sure. He's saying that if kids learn to respect their parents, they're going to be more likely to be respectful members of society.
Exactly. They're going to contribute. And it's interesting. He actually shares this personal story to
Mm.
illustrate this point.
Oh,
He
really?
talks about how his father would exclude him from adult conversations,
Wow.
sometimes even sending him out of the room. And some people might think that's really strict.
I was going to say,
But Thompson looks back on it as a lesson in boundaries
oh, that's interesting.
and a lesson in respecting his elders. He learned to understand that he had his place and that he wasn't supposed to interrupt or interfere in things that weren't his business,
Makes sense.
which he says is really different from how some parents are today.
Yeah.
They let their kids in on everything,
Yeah.
even gossiping about other adults.
It's so true.
And he sees that blurring of lines between what's for adults and what's for kids as a problem.
I think it's a good point.
Like kids are growing up too fast.
Yeah, they're missing out on being innocent, just being kids.
Exactly. And it's like we're robbing them of that chance to
Mm.
be carefree and to develop at their own pace. He believes that when kids are exposed to too much adult stuff,
Yeah,
it messes with their emotional and psychological development.
makes sense. It can be too much for them.
And it's not just about overhearing conversations. He also criticizes this trend of dressing kids in clothes that are way too grown up for them.
Oh, yeah.
He says it sends the wrong message and could even put them at risk.
It's all connected.
It is. It's about setting those boundaries.
Hmm.
Letting kids be kids. It's like he uses this analogy of a child learning to walk. You need that strong foundation, that
Yeah.
that structure
That's support.
to help them mature properly.
Yes. And without that guidance, without those boundaries, they might not develop the maturity, the wisdom to really deal with adult life.
Right. And then they end up relying on other people to pick up the slack, even as adults.
Exactly.
And one thing he focuses on a lot is the role of men.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about how important it is for men to set an example, to act with integrity, to be those positive role models that younger generations can look up to.
Yeah, he really laments the lack of strong male role models in society, doesn't he?
He does. And he challenges parents, especially fathers,
Mm.
to step up and fill that role for their own kids.
It's a big ask.
It is.
It is.
But he emphasizes how much young people are looking for guidance, for authenticity.
Yeah.
They want to find people they can trust. And when they can't, it leads to this feeling of shame, disillusionment.
Yeah. Can be really discouraging. And then he brings back the example of Venus and Serena, right?
He does.
Their father was so dedicated to their training,
Absolutely.
and that paved the way for them to be so successful.
And he makes the point that it's not just about sports, it's about anything.
Right.
Music,
Ministry.
whatever it is.
Yeah, it's the same principle.
That early, consistent investment from parents is absolutely key
For sure.
to helping kids succeed, reach their potential.
It's not just about talent, it's about nurturing that talent, right? It's
Mhm.
about giving them the support, the guidance they need. And, Thompson really pushes for parents to be proactive. You have
Mhm.
to identify your kids' talents, their passions, and nurture them.
And he specifically talks about raising kids in the ways of faith,
Right.
making sure they have that strong spiritual foundation to help them as they grow. It's about giving them that head start, equipping them not just to survive, but to thrive.
Absolutely. It's about setting them up for success in all areas of life. It's a pretty powerful message.
It's almost like, he's saying that parenting isn't just about providing for your kids, giving them food and shelter.
It's so much more than that.
It's about actively shaping the next generation.
Absolutely. Instilling those values,
Yeah.
helping them discover their gifts and then nurturing them
And preparing them to make a real difference in the world.
to contribute something good. Yeah.
This chapter really makes you think about the influence we all have,
Oh, yeah.
whether we're parents or mentors or just adults who interact with kids.
It's a big responsibility.
It is. It's a powerful reminder that our actions, our words, even just the example we set, it can have a huge impact.
Especially on young people.
Yeah, it's a call to be intentional,
Mhm.
to invest in the next generation, to realize We all have a role to play in making things better.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Think about the values, the skills that you're passing on to the kids in your life.
That's good.
Are you helping them become responsible, compassionate, successful? It's something to really consider.
It really is, and this deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too.
Thanks for guiding us through this chapter.
It's been my pleasure.
And remember, everyone, even the smallest acts of mentorship, of guidance, they can make a world of difference in a child's life.
So true. Never underestimate your influence.
Great takeaway for all of us. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exciting exploration.